The more hits we play, the more hits we get. URLradio.net. Stacy, Sturm, Stacy and her posse in the morning, and in the studio with me right now. Well, I shouldn't say technically in the studio. Technically on the phone with me right now, we have Apryll and we have Mike, and we're going to be talking about a really great new nonprofit called CommonBondz. Morning, guys. How are you?
Morning, Stacy. We're great.
Good. Let's talk a little bit about CommonBondz. We discussed it a little bit earlier, and when I heard about this, I thought this is an amazing idea and something that is so very needed right now during these times is being able to connect. So tell us how you guys, well, first tell us about CommonBondz, just real briefly about kind of what the goal is of CommonBondz.
So CommonBondz is a nonprofit that our mission is really focused on educating what drives racism and bias against African Americans. We want to address the different forms of racism in America, and we also want to address what white privilege is and what that means. So that's basically the mission, just to kind of, educate around those ideas and just try to educate people, like I said. And then what we want to do is we have a mentorship program where we want to start a dialogue between different races. We want, one-on-one. We want African Americans to start talking to white people and white people to start talking to African Americans and display some of these ideas or these biases or these generalities where, we don't really know about each other. And we want to just start talking so that we can talk truth and just kind of share our experiences and then that way we can be supportive of one another. So the mentorship program is a one-on-one program where we pair an African American with a white person, and then, they move from casual relationships or acquaintances and then move to be able to talk honestly and openly with one another and talk about perceptions and, what they thought or how they feel. And then maybe together kind of come together and figure out how, at that level, how do we affect change? How can we get involved in this racist system? And how can we, even just the two of us, how can we get some progress going?
Right. Here's the thing I noticed most about what you just said is two things, actually. One is I feel like a lot of people don't know what white privilege is. I feel like they think white privilege has to do with money. I see comments all the time on social media of misunderstanding that they think white privilege is like, well, I didn't grow up rich. I wasn't privileged, but they don't understand what white privilege actually is.
Exactly. I'll let Mike jump in here.
Yeah, I think, Stacy, you hit on something that is a real critical point for us. And the term white privilege for white people puts us a little bit on the defensive. Now folks can't see us on the radio, but Apryll is African American and I am white. And so that term, I think you really hit the nail on the head of most white folks move immediately to privilege being that of class.
Right, monetary, yeah.
Monetary and wealth. And while that is certainly certainly a definition of privilege, there are multiple definitions around privilege. And, what we're focused on and where white privilege comes into play is the general day-to-day living that you can do that as a white person, you don't give second thoughts to, but as an African American, you do. And that's difficult as whites because, quite honestly, we don't understand it because we haven't experienced it. It's something in our lives that we haven't experienced, but there's an implicit bias in our society where that occurs. And, as Apryll mentioned, our goal at CommonBondz really is to educate folks around different areas of racism, with individual racism being a key area. And it is talking about that implicit bias that's built into our society that African Americans experience every day, but as whites, we never do. And, examples that, I hear from friends of mine who are African American are if you have a young son, you have to have a conversation with that son about how to handle an interaction with the police. That's never a conversation that I even thought about having to have with my son. You brought up a situation, Stacy, to us about a friend of yours who went into a convenience store and made a very minor purchase and came out with a receipt. And you said, what do you need a receipt for such a minor purpose? And the person explained to you, who was African American, that they needed the receipt to be able to prove they purchased the merchandise.
Yeah, it was eye-opening to me because he wanted to go in and grab us some sodas. And so I gave him like $4. I'm like, here you go. And he came back out with a receipt. I'm like, I don't need the receipt. I trust you. And his words were, I know you do. I don't know if the cashier will. I always get a receipt. Even if I'm getting a pack of gum, I get a receipt before I walk out with that item.
Yeah, and as Apryll said, I think when you look at what we're looking at doing with CommonBondz, it really is about education. There are multiple forms of education. We respect that people learn differently. And we also respect that discussing race is not comfortable for a lot of people. Yeah. So whether you want to participate in a community forum, you want to participate in a one-on-one partnership mentorship, you want to ask a question confidentially, whatever's your comfort level, we provide all those different channels. But the biggest thing for us is to educate people around different forms of racism, and many of them that are implicitly built into our society that many white people don't even realize because they don't live it. They haven't lived it every day. And many of us don't have close friends that are a different race. And it gives them an opportunity to get learning personally from folks who've experienced it. And, our confidence level is when you do sit down and be open to learning, the learnings that you will get will be very surprising and very enlightening. Mm-hmm. And will move you like it's moved myself and moved others to take action around it.
So you're leading right into the second thing that I think is really great about CommonBondz is, like Apryll was talking, it's the mentoring, it's the pairing together for experiences. Because I think once we can not look at African American as a race, or what they would call Black Lives issues, or what they call this, like once you can get to know people as their race, but beyond their race, people are more open and accepting to getting rid of a lot of those stereotypes and learning more.
Yeah. It's important that Black people are seen as Black people and white people are seen as white people. There's nothing wrong with seeing, this colorblind notion is not beneficial to anyone, because if you don't see that I'm an African American woman, then you don't see me. Right. There, and there's culture, there's just, beautiful differences in the races, and that is fine. But the point is not to discriminate because of the differences, but to, the mentorship program is more of seeing what we do have in common, the common bond. Mike and I, we couldn't be more different. We're the same age. We were born in the same era, but he grew up differently than I grew up. He was born into privilege. I was born into poverty. But we realized that we had common bonds. I mean, our heart issues, our core issues, our belief system are common. And so on that ground, we came together to formulate this nonprofit. And that's what we want to see in our mentorship program, to find the common bond and build on that. See how that to help move things in the right direction with regard to racism and white privilege in America.
So what do you guys think is going to be your biggest hurdle moving forward? If you guys have any issues, what do you think it's going to be in trying to get your message out?
Well, I think again that we are taking what we feel is a unique approach as compared to many others. We are not and will not be a confrontational organization. We are an educational organization that really wants to hear people's perceptions and want to have people willing to learn about data and facts and others' perceptions. And I think, as Apryll mentioned, it's learning experiences from people that you haven't experienced yourself. For me, probably the biggest aha moment after the George Floyd murder was not doing research and reading articles and things about racism in America, but it was talking to my friends who were African American or who are African American and getting firsthand experiences from them on how these incidents affect them and how they've had to live through them their whole lives. So I think the biggest challenge is we live in a very polarized environment today. Social justice gets built in right now with a lot of other issues from a political spectrum, and we want to stay away from the politics as well. Now, realistically, the direction we take will lead into some political things that have to occur in the future, but we're not leading in from a political point of view. The biggest challenge for us is just having people sit back and be willing to listen and learn versus immediately move to their position on a particular issue and stick with that position.
Right.
Even if they don't have as much knowledge as we'd like them to have. So again, this is why our approach is not going to be confrontational. It's not going to be argumentative. We're not going to tell people you're wrong. We've had plenty of people already give us their opinions, which are different than what we are striving for, we believe in. We don't answer them by saying you're wrong. We say we respect your opinions. Would you be willing to work with us to learn more about why we feel the way we do? And we want to learn a little bit more about why you feel the way you do. And then, as April said, come to a common bond and a common direction of where we can go. And a lot of these things are similar to many other issues. It's meeting at a together place. I think the two challenges are living in a society that's highly polarized and people feeling strong that an opinion on one particular issue means you have to have an opinion on all other issues based on that polarization.
Right.
And I think the second item is really just getting folks to listen. Really sit back, listen, be willing to learn. And then if somebody listens and learns and their perceptions haven't changed or their view hasn't changed, we certainly will respect that. We may not agree with it, and we'll certainly respect it more for their willingness to learn than taking a position without having all the knowledge to go with it.
I agree, and pretty much, I believe that most of society are basically good. I mean, there's evil, no doubt. There's hardcore racists, no doubt, and that's not who we're trying to convince.
Yeah, that's never going to happen. You'll never convince a hardcore racist to not be racist. Yeah.
No, but there's some people, specifically white people, who have questions or who their only educational piece around African Americans is the news or TV or what they perceive. For example, Kaepernick kneeling during the game or the anger that they see in African Americans. There should be some understanding or some content around that. It is true. It is true that we're angry. James Baldwin said, to be African American and relatively conscious in America is to be at rage almost all the time. And it's because of, situations like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. Those are just three examples that happened, I think, in a 2-month time span. But that happens all the time. It just so happens to be recorded on TV, but it has happened to us really since we hit the shores in slavery. It's been happening. And for me, the part that really makes me angry is, of course, the injustice that occurs on a daily basis, but it's really, some people just not having a clue as to what it is that we go through. And I call it a voluntary ignorance. Like they're ignorant, willingly to be ignorant.
Right.
And that makes me angry because, if you have 2 eyes and 2 ears, something is wrong. Mm-hmm. And why not find out what it is and see if you can be a part of the solution? Yeah. So that's really what it is, to kind of have that conversation with those folk who are basically good. They're just in their bubble and are comfortable there. We just want to kind of have a conversation with them and hopefully, have them be on the right side of justice.
Here's what I think is so great about what you guys are doing. A lot of the whole Black Lives Matter movement, in the heart, in the core of it, it's in a good place. But essentially what it is doing is giving people an out to be able to stay racist because of rioting and looting. They don't understand it. And so it's giving people an out to not learn and to not want to help and to stay comfortably kind of closeted racist.
Right. So two things with regard to the rioting.
Yeah.
The first thing is there are agitators that come alongside those movements from out. It's been documented. Philadelphia has documented it. People from outside of Philadelphia come into the city and loot and riot and agitate. That's the one piece.
Well, a lot of the riot and agitation has actually been caused by people not as part of any of it, and actually people on the other side of it who want to incite violence.
Exactly. So so that's been documented and proven.
Yeah.
And then the other part is that, like I just said about James Baldwin and to being enraged, it's like, Malcolm Jenkins. Malcolm Jenkins. He was on the Eagles, and now I think he's with New Orleans. He holds up this sign, "You are not listening."
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating that, people want to talk about this and talk about that and other issues. They don't hear us.
Yeah.
They don't see us. They don't hear us. So sometimes, I'm not saying that it's necessarily the right thing to do, but when you break a glass, then you see us now, don't you?
Right.
You hear us, don't you? It's like you don't hear us. You don't see us. And so it's like, what do we do? How can we be heard? How can we be seen? And again, I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying that is the mindset of some people is, you don't hear me. You haven't heard us for 400 years. You haven't seen us because things are the same. And things continue to happen time after time, day after day, lynching from slavery to now, just a different form of it. And you don't hear us. And so, those are the two things I would say around the looting and the rioting.
Yeah. Well, and I feel somebody put it very eloquently when they said, what happens if you just keep shaking a pop bottle? What happens until you just keep shaking it and shaking it and shaking it for a long time? The damn thing's going to explode. And it's just you can't control it. But boy, you notice it now when it explodes all over your car or your house or your business or whatever it is.
And, I think the challenge we all have as well, and to echo April's thoughts, many of us get our information from sources we're comfortable getting information from. And many of those sources are similar or aligned with our core beliefs and our core position, and whether it's on social justice or on the economy or on anything. The challenge is that we gear our perceptions off of those same sources over and over and over again. And, what I challenge folks to do is and those sources we get that information from will certainly promote their side. And certainly part of promoting their side is to bring negativity to the other side. What I discuss a lot with people is, when you see violence occur and violence against African Americans, and in particular, when you see violence against African Americans against other African Americans, because that's one of the things we see is a lot of violence in our inner cities, and our inner cities are predominantly African American. Obviously, you're focusing on the story of what occurs, but focus on the pain and heartache and suffering you see from the people in that community.
Yeah.
And with every story you see, they talk to the people in the community on their pain of how it has to stop and them needing help for it to stop. And I think what you'll find in the way that we're going to educate people is in a very sustained way where we teach around individual racism, we teach around interpersonal racism. We educate really what is meant by white privilege, as we talked earlier. It's broader than the privilege of wealth. And that's a really dive into each of the specific elements of racism and what's occurred, whether it's education, whether it's wage, employment, housing, etc. And as you look at each of these areas, you get a really clear picture of, how our inner cities have developed and what the challenges are within our inner cities and why these things happen. And that's the critical piece, as Apryll said. We need people to listen, and we need them to not ultimately react based on their, we call it ignorance, but I like to call it intellectual mediocrity. We only have a certain part of the story. Mm-hmm. Ask the question why, and then get all the information, and then you'll be much more equipped to make a personal decision on it than many people, including myself. I mean, this is certainly something I test myself on with every instance. I have an automatic reaction, either positively or negatively, on something that might be controversial or somebody is completely opposite believing. But I got to step back and check myself and say, okay, why does this person feel this way that's totally different from me? And I try to get their understanding. And at the end of the day, I might move. In some cases, I have moved a little bit to better understanding and move more to how do we collaborate in fixing it. Or I may say, nope, I still don't agree with you. But at least I've taken the time to get myself educated on it. And that's what we're looking at doing. We're educating people, listening, asking why, and believe that when you get educated on the topics we're discussing, people are going to have their eyes open to the situation that we have going on and what's happened within our society and what are the things we have to do to change it.
How can people help? If people want to get involved with CommonBondz, what can they do? How can they help?
Yeah, so we have a number of ways that people can help. I mean, if you go to our website, www.commonbondz.org, we actually have a link that talks about getting involved. I think Apryll talked about probably the most engaged, or what people are most interested in, is the partnership mentoring program. And again, what I mentioned earlier, we find that there aren't a lot of white people who have the personal relationships with African Americans to be able to ask them, how does this feel to you? Not for me, for you. The proverbial walking 1,000 miles or walking a mile in someone's shoes. So this partner and mentorship program. We have a speaker series where we ask folks to come in and tell their stories when we hold our community forums. And so we want people to come in and tell their stories about either experiencing racism or, from a white perspective, asking questions as to, why do folks believe this when I don't see it, etc. We have folks who can share their different skills. We've been blessed that a number of our communication vehicles and our social media and the videos we put together and the robustness we've been able to roll this out have been people volunteering their time and expertise to help us. And we've had a number of people who volunteer to help us in that regard as well. Mm-hmm. So people who are sharing their skills with us. We have people who are donating money, and there's a tab that you can donate as well. And the donations really go towards us being able to get significant speakers to come, sponsoring different events that we can educate, going into a lot of schools and businesses who've asked us to assist them in setting up programs within their organization. So those are a number of different ways that people can get involved. But again, if you go to www.commonbondz.org and you go to the Get Involved tab, we got a number of different ways that people can get involved, and we really want to have people get involved.
Right, and then share our on social media. Talk about CommonBondz with your friends, your family, and your coworkers. But yeah, definitely follow us on our social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Those are for and YouTube as well. So yeah, if you like us and follow us, that will be helpful as well.
And CommonBondz is with a Z, just in case people are trying to find you guys, right? CommonBondz, BONDZ, correct?
Yes.
CommonBondz with a Z, yeah. And if you go on our website, we talk a little bit about the reasonings around the letter Z and why we utilized it, and as it relates to collaboration and those types of things. So there's a little bit of detail in our mission statement where we also talk about why CommonBondz with a Z. And so it is www.commonbonds.org.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Mike DeCandido, Apryll Adams, CommonBondz, thank you so much for being a guest on the radio station today, and best of luck on your new venture. I think it's going to be amazing for not just for everybody's community, but hopefully for connecting people all across the country.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye-bye.